Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Greetings to you. If you tuned in last week, you know that this is part 2 of the marriage cure. How to cure your marriage of all of the ills that you have had. And most couples divorce within the first 7 years of marriage. And people are, my term to Chris Shaver last week was, we're in a jungle and we can't figure out anything. We know something is wrong, but we don't even know where to start. So welcome back, Chris Shaver.
Thank you, Dr. Duffy. It's wonderful to be here again.
And the Couples Whisperer, and you explained last week that you are a certified Berkman method consultant, and that you use this Berkman, Birkman method, that cuts through all the variables, all the factors, and gets to the core, the heart of the matter. And as I recall from last week, there are lots of pairs, 22 pairs of opposites. So tell us a little bit more about that. And they're all based on behavior, not thoughts, but behavior.
They are, and there's 22 pairs of opposite behaviors that Berkman measures. And, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me back. It's really my pleasure to be here.
Great.
But if you divide, what Berkman does is it measures 9 behaviors. It measures 10 interests, which have a very strong behavioral component. And then there's 3 sort of behind-the-scene things that help couples understand each other, to get a little deeper into personality. But the 9 behaviors relate, there's 3 energies: social energy, physical energy, emotional energy. There's behavior that relates to respect. There's behavior that relates to decision-making, structure, thought, and even down to attention span. So these are the very specific things that are going on between you as a couple all the time. And then the 10 interests, they really are not technically opposites, although if somebody has a strong interest, that will be a dominant filter on their life. I was married to somebody who had a high artistic interest for 43 years, and if her visual environment was not pristine and pleasing, she was upset. There are people who also have what I would call an antipathy around certain interest areas. So I've worked with couples where, it's like the odd couple. One person is a slob, the other person needs, perfect. So there's these 10 interests, and that's really like the sum total of what you're looking at. It's the nitty gritty of what's in front of you every moment of your relationship, behaviorally speaking.
Wow! Even with that, Chris Shaver, I see in my own marriage, I have very high artistic interests. My husband, not so much. He's all function. Is it functional? That's all he cares about. And I remember a show on one of the TV stations, HGTV, something like that. And I don't know if it's still on, but it had to do with a him and a her, and how the designer blended his needs and her needs. And so to create a him-her kind of house, kind of home. And I think the point you made last week, Chris Shaver, about you're not wrong, you're just different. And my way is not the right way. And if you deviate from what I think the world is and should look like and what I value, something is wrong with you, right? Something is wrong with you. This attitude is so prevalent, And it's really what is polarizing our country.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're not wrong about that. And there's a analogy, metaphor. I think an English major would know the difference. But they say if you put a red ant and a black ant into a bottle, they won't fight each other. If you shake that bottle, they'll start fighting. So our country there's people shaking the bottle very deliberately,
right,
to try and turn us against each other. And they are doing it behaviorally. It's done across behavioral lines. So that's an interesting thing in and of itself, but that's a whole other set of relationship questions.
Yeah, and I like the term you used, such a simple term last week. It was stress behaviors, right? So how do we act under stress? And it's not a pretty picture, right, Chris?
No, we have very clear behavioral needs, most of us. Now, sometimes they can be situational and conditional. If I have more energy, I can withstand more of behaviors that aren't exactly appealing to me. And if I'm at a low energetically, my rules may change a little bit, but we all have clear needs for how we need to be treated. So, and when we don't get treated that way, we slip into stress behaviors, which are, Berkman kind of charitably calls them your least effective behavior. I call them your relationship ending behaviors. Yeah, I think it's quite charitable because honestly, the couples see, we all misinterpret our stress behaviors. We don't understand that a stress behavior is in our minds, our stress behavior is a very clear message to our spouse to say, hey, treat me this way.
Right.
Nobody got the code book. I can tell you, not one of us got the code book.
Yeah.
When it really gets, when the rubber meets the road and the stress behaviors start flying, nobody got the code book. So that's what Berkman gives you. It's the code book to your spouse and your spouse for you. If you don't both have the code book, both of you are going to engage in this attribution where you think the worst and say the worst about each other because you think you're just being jerks, not really trying to communicate what you need.
Right. Yes. And so when you say, Chris Shaver, that we all have certain relational needs and those needs are clear, I think the needs themselves are clear, but the person is not clear about what they need.
Can you say that in a different way? That's
yes.
confusing.
Yeah. In other words, another one of my certifications is a Gestalt therapist, and we diagnose not in the traditional way. We have to diagnose traditionally for insurance purposes, but our version of neurosis is when somebody has what's called an interrupted cycle of needs, interrupted contact cycle, so that that contact cycle can be interrupted by a person not being clear about their own needs, because as you were saying in the last show, they're used to not getting their needs met. They're used to clamming up. And so they don't know how to express their needs. And then when they do, they express them very poorly, very, very immaturely. And so let's say a person then they're not interrupted in the early part of the cycle. They know what their needs are, and then they move themselves to galvanize their energy to meet those needs. And that can involve either themselves or with another person. And then you have, double trouble because this person has their own needs. So at any point, we can be interrupted. And another interruption that's very, very typical is a person feels they need sociability. They go to a party, they go to the party, and they don't communicate. They don't make contact. Or another interruption, if that's not an interruption, they make contact, but then they leave the party and all they say is next. They don't assimilate their new experiences into growth and what they've learned from that, and that so their experiences are very rich for them, for their quality of life. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, let me take it one at a time, because the first thing you said was they clam, a situation where somebody's needs are interrupted and they clam up. So in Berkman language, there's a behavior called respect. The respect revolves around a pair of opposite behaviors. So on the low end of that Berkman scale, if you would, there's people who need people to be direct with them. Just tell me what you're thinking. Don't hold back. Don't filter it. And so very task-focused human beings. And then on the upper end of the scale, there are people who need you to be very relationship sensitive and tactful and diplomatic when you approach them. On that upper end of the scale, the stress behavior that occurs if that person's needs aren't met is they retreat, they withdraw. So when you were talking about an interrupted situation where somebody would clam up, you're talking about a predicted stress behavior. And so I zoom right in on this respect area. So somebody is being too abrupt with you, somebody's being too pushy with you, too forward, not respecting you. The classic example is I had a client who would call his wife on the phone and just start talking, never say hello. He was like, he doesn't, like it just crosses all my wires. Like, why can't he say hello? And he's a very task-focused person, right? So
yes.
So what they could agree on is that twice a day, morning and afternoon, he would say hello. But in the other times, if he called, don't take it personally. I'm just trying to get things done and keep moving through my day. But
yes.
this is the way this is sort of the what Berkman gives you is like, oh, I had no idea that's how it worked for you. Yeah, that's how it works for me. This is what I need. And it's there on paper, so you can't argue about it. I'm not crazy. We both took the same assessment. You're over here, I'm over here. Now what do we do? Right? So it becomes nutsy boltsy to me. And once you understand it, if you're willing, to accommodate your partner a little bit, the effort of trying goes a long way in my experience. But having a grounded way to assess and say, oh, this is really the problem we have, and it's not new to us, or it's not original, and I'm not crazy, and you're not crazy. This is us. This is what we have to deal with. That's the helpful part.
Oh, I like that. This is us. I'm not crazy, and you're not crazy.
It's like,
yes.
I'm okay, and you're okay, but it's I'm not crazy, you're not crazy.
Right. Or I'm okay, you're okay, or I'm not okay, you're not okay, and that's okay. In other words, human beings have their flaws.
Yep. Yeah.
We all
do.
Yeah. All right. So behaviorally, so I'd like you to say hello twice a day. And if you don't, then you can explain. I'm just running through something right now because I have literally 1.5 minutes before my next appointment. Yeah. Now you were saying to me earlier before we had our show that you have your very first couple was a great example for you, great learning example.
Yeah, I had they were kind of forwarded to me from a business client, knew nothing about them. It was a family member, it turned out. The husband was a marriage counselor. He taught marriage counseling, he was a PhD psychologist, taught marriage counseling at a mid-major university. He and his wife, they were supposedly coming in as tire kickers, just, to see what I did, they would be interested in it. And it was a beautiful October day, the sun was shining, phone rang, I came in, it was a phone conference, and the second they spoke, I could tell this was a couple in conflict. I do work in business settings, I do work with couples, and you don't have to listen with big ears to hear that people are tense and uneasy with each other. So I went from a tire kicker to just looking at Berkman, and the Berkman method is predictive. It tells you if there's a 30-point gap between your behavior and my need, there will be conflict. So it becomes very easy for me to scan the whole thing and say, this is going to be a couple in conflict around X. So they had been going, it turned out, to marriage counseling for 20 years. They had been married 30 years. And they were having to burn down the marriage fights. I knew none of this going in. But what I pointed to was, I said, you're both highly competitive. You're both, but the wife in this scenario, I've been talking to you about this one-to-one, like if my need isn't met, I show up with this predicted stress behavior. Well, life gets a little more complicated than that, because this wife's stress behavior, normally our stress behaviors, 90% of the time, our stress behaviors are very clear. Like in the case of the that we just talked about, where somebody would retreat if they weren't treated respectfully, they would,
Yeah.
they would clam up. But in this case, this was around authority, so the assertiveness. And so when the husband showed up and was overly assertive with his wife, her need was collaboration. Don't direct me. Don't be authoritative with me. The normal stress behavior for that would be to become passive aggressive, would be just to agree, but then haunt that person for the rest of their life. That's not a burn down the marriage, yelling, screaming fight. Berkman also measures something they call a reversal. So in this case, when her need was not met, she became highly assertive and started screaming at him. Well, his stress behavior, when screamed at, was to scream back. And this is what I mean by competitive, because in that case, nobody would back down. So they got these fights, escalated. And when she was screaming, what she was really meaning was, hey, can you just talk to me in a conversational way? Can we talk through this? But you can hear how confusing that would be. If somebody's screaming, people who have a high need on assertiveness usually are like iron sharpens iron. We'll blow it out. It's like sort of the classic Italian family fight. We'll have this blowout fight, and then we'll have makeup sex afterwards or something. But for her, she was stressing herself out by screaming. He was screaming at her, which was stressing her more. It was a never-ending loop.
Yeah.
I pointed this out in 10 minutes. I showed them exactly what they need to do to disintermediate that. When he gets loud, she just has to hold up a finger and put it to her lips, which was the signal for him to back down. And I got the whole thing with any of this stuff doesn't work. And I got a phone call 6 months later that said, this solved the problem that we'd really had through our entire marriage, 30 years. Now we have the language to navigate this so we don't get into that burn down the marriage fight. And this was a marriage counselor who taught marriage counseling. These things are not obvious. And that's what Berkman does so wonderfully is you take a 40-minute assessment and, I produced this report called How to Avoid the Biggest Mistakes You Could Make with Each Other. That would have been on this report for this couple. How do you avoid this? What's actually going on, and what do they need instead?
And can you tell us more about that, Chris Shaver? How can people access your wisdom? You are the author of The Marriage Cure. You are known as the Couples Whisperer. Chris Shaver, spelled as it sounds, Shaver. So how can people get your book and find out more information about how to cure their marriage?
Well, my book is on Amazon. It's Marriage Cure. And my website is coupleswhisperer.com. And on coupleswhisperer.com, to me, the book is an interesting read. If you go to coupleswhisperer.com, you can take the assessment, buy the How to Avoid the Biggest Mistakes You Can Make with Each Other for $129. That's the book you want to read. That's the book on your marriage. A generic book that talks about people in general. Maybe I have a little wisdom in that regard. Maybe I don't. What I do know is that Berkman is profoundly accurate, and my interpretation of it will be extremely helpful for you. And at $129 to get that information about your marriage so you don't make those burn down the marriage fights is a very big deal. It's a very wonderful value.
Wow. Do you have any more simple, short examples? We're running out of time, Chris Shaver, so that people can get their arms around what you're talking about in terms of the needs, the 22 pairs of opposites, and then the 5 biggest mistakes. And so you also talk about strengths, right? To find out the couple's strengths?
Well, yes. So there's another report that I can pull. It's not on my website yet. It's called How to Talk to Each Other. and yet another one called How to Work with Each Other. And your normal behaviors, your usual behaviors, Berkman measures your usual behaviors. It measures your needs for those behaviors from your spouse or partner, and it measures 10 interests. So your usual behaviors are your strengths. They're what you go, why you're hired in the world at large. People see you for your behaviors. So when I say that I can help couples understand their strengths as a couple, frequently the same things that can make couples fight become actually the attributes that they can lean on to help solve those same fights. In other words, you could say, the last couple I worked with, the wife was an engineer and the husband was an artist. Well, if they needed logic, if they needed a mechanical perspective, the wife stepped in and took over. And if they needed somebody who was intuitive, somebody who was more emotionally based to help, or even the visual side of it, decorating the house, it was this flipped couple from our, cultural norms or expectations. That became who they were. So having this accurate understanding of themselves as a couple became kind of a roadmap for their success. At the same time that the understanding their needs, their behavioral needs, was clearly a roadmap for staying, in productive, non-stressed out relationship.
Very true. Very true. Different sets of strengths to be utilized as a team when either requires a merger of both, or this one's for you, honey. This has to do with picking out the right frame for this painting or the right color on the wall. Yeah, and this one's for you. How does this work? Please fix it, or get someone to fix it, or something like that.
Yeah, and it goes, if you don't really have that menu of who you are, you spin a lot of wheels. People try and take over areas they shouldn't be taking over. It just becomes a very simple way to navigate your relationships, especially during times of change. I think that's one of the biggest things, if I could leave your audience and all of us with anything, is during times of change, the rules seem to change. You're going through a life change. Your children have left the house. You're going through a life change. Your children have just arrived. It's the whole gamut. So we start our relationships in these dating behaviors where there's no stress on the relationship. We think we know the other person. But it's during these moments of change, if you don't have an accurate picture of who you are as a couple, people really get lost, and they start to attribute all kinds of strange things to each other's behaviors, where it's really just, this is me under stress, this is what I need, help me understand, help me understand what's going on in your mind, become these mazes of conversations that couples get lost in. So really having this roadmap for all these behaviors, for your needs, for your interests, becomes this profound, lifelong, it's the book on your marriage. These things don't change. Stages of marriages change. Your behaviors and your needs and your interests, pretty stable. This is what Berkman has found. Underneath all of this massive, change of aging and everything, we're fairly stable individuals behaviorally.
Right. That's very interesting. Yes. Yeah. So we talked in the last show about the immature behavior, and you don't do this. So people can be clear enough about their needs, or maybe not articulate what the need is, just know that they're uncomfortable in their body, they're unhappy, and the source of their unhappiness is their partner who doesn't give them what they need. And so basically the conversation is, you're not giving me this. And how does a couple re-articulate what they want in a non-blaming way?
I think the profound gift, and I don't use that word lightly, the profound gift of Berkman, bring language to this area of needs, to bring a shared language, because right now, if you were a woman in trouble in a relationship, and you were to say to your spouse, "You're not giving me what I need," this would probably be what you would call a disrupted cycle of unmet needs. I think that was the term you used before. And so these cycles go on and on and on because you're saying, I need something. Your spouse literally can't hear it. They can't hear it because they don't have a shared language, because they work differently than you do. So seeing this in black and white, seeing these pairs of opposites shown, it's like, oh, this is how I perceive the world. This is how you perceive the world. I never knew that. So now when you say this, now I can go back and I was like, that's your framework. And it's totally different from mine. But now I finally understand what you're saying. And I can actually give you what you need without taking it personally, without misinterpreting it, because it's clear and it's in front of me in a shared way.
Or the power struggle stage, as Hendricks and others would define it. If I give you what you need, then I lose. Zero-sum game, rather than the idea of collaborating and saying, we want some basic equity. We want to help each other get our needs met. And if I can give you something like that look, that hug, that smile, that greeting that fulfills you, I can do that. That's an easy win. That's an easy fix, so to speak.
It does address, Berkman does address, I mean, you've really put your finger on it, that there are power struggles. Two sets of hands, one steering wheel. That's a marriage. That's a relationship. So couples have to figure this out. Putting it in black and white puts it in very solid terms. Yeah, and you either figure it out or you part. So it's just a tool set, and now you've got to learn how to use it. But having that shared language gives you the ability to say, hey, I'm not getting it from you. Here it is in black and white. If you give it to me, I can give back. Now we're dancing. But we're not fighting, we're not battling, we're dancing. We're collaborating, we're cooperating, whatever it would be. Couples all have to figure that out, but it just gives you the language to do it.
And I'm thinking of the typical differences between men and women, where a woman might talk feeling and a man might talk fact, and a man might say, I don't care about your feelings, because I think what a lot of women do when they try to make I statements with feelings is it's a command. Because I feel this way when you do this, you must. And I think that that's what goes wrong when you attempt to talk about feelings.
We could do an entire show on that.
I'm going to take you up on that offer, Chris Shaver, The Marriage Cure. And to access his wonderful information, thecoupleswhisperer.com. Thank you so much, Chris. And please come on the show again. You're more than welcome. This is Dr. Duffy Spencer saying goodbye for now and wishing you great relationships.